Hi, everyone. Welcome to the UC Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive. My name is Nat Reese, and I'm the film program manager here. We're so excited to see you all out here for this very special event. And I have two quick announcements to make before we get started. One is please refrain from photography or video recording for today's event. And the second is that after it ends, please remain in your seats so that we can ensure that the center stage conversants can easily exit the theater. Once they've safely exited, then everyone is welcome to leave. And now I'm very excited to welcome to the stage Sophie Volp, who's the professor of East Asian Languages and Cultures and professor of comparative literature at UC Berkeley. Thank you.
I am delighted to be introducing Ocean Vuong, the 2024 Avenali Chair of the Townsend Center for the Humanities. I'd like to thank Stephen Best and Rebecca Egger, Director and Associate Director at the Townsend Center, for their tremendous efforts in bringing Ocean here tonight, and to thank BAM PFA for hosting us. Ocean will be reading tonight from his second collection of poems, Time is a Mother. Then he'll be joined on stage by Stephen, who will relate questions from the audience. Ocean is the author of the New York Times best-selling novel, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, which won the American Book Award, the New England Book Award, and the Mark Twain Award, and has now been translated into 40 languages. Last one was Albanian, I think, and the one before that was Chinese. His first collection of poetry, Night Sky with Exit Wounds, was a New York Times top 10 book of 2016 and won the T.S. Eliot Prize, the Whiting Award, the Thom Gunn Award, and the Felix Denix Prize for Best First Collection. Foreign Policy named Ocean one of the top 100 leading global thinkers following the publication of Night Sky with Exit Wounds. Among other honors, Ocean has held a MacArthur Foundation Genius Grant and won fellowships and prizes from the Lannan Foundation, the Civitella Ranieri Foundation, the Elizabeth George Foundation, and the American Academy of Poets. His work has appeared in The Atlantic, Granta, Harper, The Nation, The New Republic, The New Yorker, The New York Times, and the Paris Review, among other venues. Ocean's work means a lot to me because I've seen firsthand how deeply our students respond to his rendering of the disjuncts of the Asian American experience, as well as to his haunting portrayal of loss and grief. When my class discussed On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, we grew closer through our shared tears. And because we're so moved by Ocean's work, there is no one whose words on the craft of writing mean more to us. Each semester, as my students begin work on their final papers, I quote Ocean. It's like the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Thank you, Ocean, for the wit, wisdom, and compassion with which you inspire us.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me all right? Is it a good volume? Okay. Thank you so much, Professor, for that beautiful introduction. I'll read a few poems, and then we'll have a conversation with Professor Bess and everyone here. Thank you so much. How many of y'all were here yesterday? Oh my goodness. Okay, I'm a little nervous now. That means I need all new material. So, okay. We'll see what we can do. If I sound like a broken record, you can just start getting the tomatoes out. But thank you so much for being here. It's lovely to be back here. This trip was my first time in UC Berkeley. The first time was about 12 years ago, reading at East Wind Books, which is a memory very, very dear to me. I'm really, really proud of that, really happy. Unfortunately, he's not here anymore, but that memory always lives. I was reading with a wonderful poet, Yun Yang, and that was really, really beautiful. So thank you. This poem is titled American Legend. So I was driving with my old man. The day wasted, save for the cobalt haze closing around us. We were on our way to kill our dog, Susan. I mean, we had to bring her to the clinic to put her down this murder. Or maybe they meant put her in the ground, though I knew Susan would be ashed in the incinerator out back. Puffs of smoke, little ghosts, poodles, where was I going with this? Right. The car, the rain, the legend of joy and pain, my old man and I, the Ford big enough for us to never touch, and maybe I meant to make the hairpin turn too hard. And the thing flipped like a new law going 80. Maybe I wanted at last to feel him against me, and it worked. As the colors spun through the windshield, wild metal clanking our shoulders, the sudden wetness warm everywhere, he slammed into me and we hugged for the first time in decades. It was perfect and wrong, like money on fire. The skin around his neck so soft, his aftershave somehow summer. It lasted not a second, but he was smiling, his teeth already half gone, as if someone wiped them away to make room for something true. Put it down on the page, son, he said one night, after telling me why he did what he did with his life, shit-faced on Hennessy. We were sitting at the kitchen table before his shift at the sock factory, his eyes raindrops in a nightmare. I touched him, then let go. The car stopped rolling. We hung upside down as things dripped, steam or breath. I did what any boy would do after getting exactly what he wanted. I kissed my father. He grinned, I think, his pupils elsewhere. I reached back, unlatched the cage. The dog stepped out, sniffed my old man, still warm, then ran into the trees, into her second future. I walked from the wreck until the yards became years, the dirt road a city, until my face became this face, and the rain washed the gasoline clean from my fingers. I found a payphone in the heart of the poem and called you collect to say all this, knowing it won't make a difference, only more. So hello, hi. The blood inside my hands is now inside the world. Words, the prophets tell us, destroy nothing they can't rebuild. I did it to hold my father, to free my dog. It's an old story, mother. Anyone can tell it. This one is a longer poem, and it works on the sentence level, so there's kind of like these little entries, and so I'll pause in between so you can get a sense of the syntax. It's called Not Even. Hey, I used to be a fag. Now I'm a checkbox. The pen tip jabbed in my back. I feel the mark of progress. I will not dance alone in the municipal graveyard at midnight, blasting sad songs on my phone for nothing. I promise you, I was here. I felt things that made death so large it was indistinguishable from air, and I went on destroying inside it like wind in a storm. The way Lil Peep says, I'll be back in the morning, when you know how it ends. The way I kept dancing when the song was over because it freed me. The way the street light blinks twice before waking up for its night shift like we do. The way we whisper, sorry, to each other, the boy and I, when there's teeth, when there's always teeth on purpose. When I threw myself into gravity and made it work. Ha! I made it out by the skin of my griefs. I used to be a fag, now I'm lit. Ha! Once, at a party set on a rooftop in Brooklyn for an artsy vibe, a young woman said, sipping her drink, "You're so lucky, you're gay, plus you get to write about war and stuff. I'm just white." Pause. I got nothing. Laughter, glasses clinking. Because everyone knows yellow pain pressed into American letters turns to gold. Our sorrow, Midas touched, napalm with a rainbow afterglow. Unlike feelings, blood gets realer when you feel it. I am trying to be real, but it costs so much. They say the earth spins, and that's why we fall. But everyone knows it's the music. It's been proven difficult to dance to machine gun fire. Still, my people made a rhythm this way. Away, my people so still in the photographs as corpses. My failure was that I got used to it. I looked at us mangled under the time photographer's shadow and stopped thinking, get up, get up. I saw the graveyard steam in the pinkish dawn and knew the dead were still breathing. Ha! If they come for me, take me out. What if it wasn't the crash that made us, but the debris? What if it was meant this way? The mother, the lexicon, the line of cocaine on the Mohawk boy's collarbone in an East Village sublet in 2007. What's wrong with me, Doc? There must be a pill for this. Because the fairy tales were right. You'll need magic to make it out of here. Long ago, in another life, on an Amtrak through Iowa, I saw for a few blurred seconds a man standing in the middle of a field of winter grass, hands at his sides, back to me, all of him stopped there, save for his hair scraped by low wind. When the countryside resumed its wash of gray wheat, tractors, gutted barns, black sycamores, and herdless pastures, I started to cry. I put my copy of Didion's The White Album down and folded a new dark around my head. The woman beside me stroked my back, saying in a Midwestern accent that wobbled with tenderness, "Go on, son. You get that out now. No shame in breaking open. You get that out and I'll fetch us some tea." Which made me lose it even more. She came back with Lipton in paper cups, her eyes nowhere blue and there. She was silent all the way to Missoula, where she got off and said, patting my knee, "God is good. God is good." I can say it was gorgeous now, my harm, because it belonged to no one else. To be a dam for damage. My shittiness will not enter the world, I thought, and quickly became my own hero. Do you know how many hours I've wasted watching straight boys play video games? Enough. Time is a mother. Lest we forget, a morgue is also a community center. In my language, the one I recall now only by closing my eyes, the word for love is il, and the word for weakness is il. How you say what you mean changes what you say. Some call this prayer. I call it watch your mouth. "Rose," I whispered, as they zipped my mother in her body bag. "Get out of there. Your plants are dying." Enough is enough. Time is a motherfucker, I said to the gravestones, alive, absurd. Body, doorway that you are, be more than what I'll pass through. Stillness, that's what it was. The man in the field in the red sweater. He was so still, he became somehow more true, like a knife wound in a landscape painting. Like him, I caved. I caved and decided it will be joy from now on. Then everything opened. The lights blazed around me into a white weather, and I was lifted, wet and bloody, out of my mother, into the world, screaming, and enough. I think 3 more poems. I wrote this poem. This poem has an epigraph from my cousin, who was 7 at the time, and her name is Sarah. And I was trying to teach her, like a good cousin, older cousin. I was trying to teach her how to her write and do her ABCs, and she really wanted to just go get ice cream. And so she said, she looked at me, she said, this is the epigraph of the poem. What's the point of writing if you're just going to force a bunch of ants to cross a white desert? And I was like, touche. I don't know. And I'm one of those people who have my best responses come, weeks later, laying in bed at 1 a.m, staring at the ceiling, and I'm like, that's what I should have said. But ultimately, this is not really a rebuttal, but a kind of consensus, a surrendering to that logic. So, dear Sarah, and if you follow these ants, they'll lead you back to stone tablets in older desert, where black bones once buried are now words, where I wave to you at 2:34 a.m. They survived the blast by becoming shrapnel embedded in my brain, which is called learning. But maybe I shouldn't talk like this. Maybe I should start over, Sarah. I messed up. I'm trying to stay clean, but my hands are monsters who believe in magic. Sarah, the throat is also an inkwell, black oil wrung through your father's fingers after a day beneath the Buick. Say heartbreak and nothing will shatter. Say Stonehenge and watch the elephants sleep like boulders blurred in Serengeti rain. It doesn't have to make sense to be real. Your Aunt Rose gone 2 years now, like a trick they forgot to finish, and the air holds your voice as it holds its own vanishing. Maybe you are the true soldier, Aunt. Hoarder of what's so massive it could crush you into a twitching comma. Sarah, your name sharpens daily against the marble of your mother's teeth. There are sparks in every calling, and called we press our faces to the womb until we're jokes on our way to cracking up. And maybe you're right, little Aunt Queen. With your shoes the shade of dirty paper, white desert, your pink and blue pens untouched. After all, who can stare at so many ruins and call it reading? This family of ants fossilized on the page. You slam the book shut, look out at the leafless trees doused in red April rain, where none of us are children long enough to love it. 2 more poems. This one is just a list poem and is called Reasons for Staying. Reasons for staying. October leaves coming down as if called. Morning fog through the wild rye beyond the train tracks. A cigarette, a good sweater on the sagging porch while the family sleeps. That I woke at all and the hawk up there thought nothing of its wings. That I snuck onto the page while the guards were shit-faced on codeine. That I read my books by the light of riot fire. That my best words came farthest from myself, and that's awesome. that you can blow a man and your voice speaks through his voice, like Jonah through the whale. Because a blade of brown rye multiplied by thousands makes a purple field. Because this mess I made with love. Because they came into my life, these ghosts, like something poured. Because crying, believe it or not, did wonders. Because my uncle never killed himself, but simply died on purpose. Because I made a promise that the McDonald's arch glimpse from the 2 a.m. rehab window off Chestnut would be enough. That mercy is small, but the earth is smaller. Summer rain hitting Peter's bare shoulders. Because I stopped apologizing into visibility. Because this body is my last address. Because right now, just before morning, when it's blood blue and the terror incumbent. Because the sound of bike spokes heading home at dawn was unbearable. Because the hills keep burning in California. Through red smoke, singing, through the singing, a way out. Because only music rhymes with music. The words I've yet to use, Timothy Grass, Jeffrey Pine, celloing, cocksure, light lusty, midnight green, gentled, water thin, lord as verb, russet, pewter, lobotomy. The night's worth of dust on his upper lip. Barn joy on the cusp of winter. The broken piano under a bridge in Windsor that sounds like footsteps when you play it. The Sharpied sign outside the foreclosed house that reads, "Seeking cat friend, please knock for Kayla." The train whistle heard through an open window after a nightmare. My mother, standing at the mirror, putting on blush before heading to chemo. Sleeping in the back seat, leaving the town that broke me intact. Early snow falling from a clear, blushed sky, as if called. And this is a new poem, so scary. It's called Theology. Thank you so much. Theology. Do you remember when I tried to be good? It was a bad time. So much was burning without a source. I'm sorry I was so young. I didn't mean it. It's just this thing is heavy. How could anyone hold all of it and not melt? I thought gravity was a law, which meant it could be broken. But it's more like a language. Once you're in it, you never get out. A fool, I climbed out the window just to look at the stars. It was too dark, and the crickets sounded like people I know saying something I don't. I think I had brothers. Think I heard them crying once, then laughing until the laughing was just in my head. That's how it is here, leaky. One day, while crossing the creek, I met a boy. His lips red as a scraped knee. When our eyes met, he gasped, then raised his rifle. That's how I found out I was a squirrel. That's how I lost my tail, the only thing I was great at. I don't know what my name is, but I can feel it, a throbbing in the blood. Last night I heard a voice and climbed to the tallest branch. so high I forgot all the rules. It was like being skinned into purpose. Below me was a rectangle the man had been digging all night. I watched him a long time, his body a question mark unraveling. When the light grew pink, the man stopped. Others in black coats gathered around him. I know I was put here for a reason, but I spend most days just missing everybody. The man lowered a box into the slot he had dug, as if pushing a coin into a giant machine. That must be how they pay to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh. Is this on? Can you hear me? Thank you, Ocean, and for sharing that new poem with us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Sophie Volpe, Professor Volpe, sort of noted that students are very eager to hear about the craft. And you read Dear Sarah, and as you were reading it, I was recalling that in an interview, you once distinguished between like the poem of the premise and the poem of the line or something like that. Yes. So we've asked students who've been studying your work to submit some questions, and I feel like there's a question that kind of can get us to talk about that poem possibly. So can I read it? Okay, so this question is, get out your other glasses, Stephen. This is by Natalie Naylor, who is taking a short fiction class with professor and author Melanie Abrams. So it's about expectations when you sit down to write. She asks, when you sit down to write, do you have expectations for a piece of writing? How do you go about navigating those expectations? Do you think they have a significant impact on what the piece becomes, either from resisting them or being guided by them?
Oh, I used to. When I first started, I think expectations, hopes, even rules were very helpful. You know, the rules are kind of like the guardrails, and then when you'd follow them, you feel like, okay, I'm a young writer. I'm starting out. I'm going where everybody else is going. It feels good, and after a while, you have to start looking, beyond it, into the forest and saying, what else is there? But the more I do this, I must say, the less I know how it's done. And I know that's not what you want to hear. You want to hear some kind of clear, reduced wisdom through 15 years of doing this. But it would be disingenuous for me to say that. And I think what happens now through putting in over a decade, which is not nothing, but also not a lot, relative to other writers. I think now for me, the North Star is just surprise. And when I wrote things that scared me or surprised me early on, I would say, oh, no. Poems don't do this. And I would kind of turn away. I would edit myself before I could. The idea would float up, and as it comes into my hand, I say, Ocean, stop it. You're not, this is, like this, the poem Not Even started with the word hey. And it took me, it's so sad in retrospect, because it took me 15 years to start a poem with the word hey. But the word hey was so important. Years ago, I was like, this
there's something so very queer to this word. This is the first little pebble in how we encounter each other. It's inside the cruising ethos. It's inside the way we utter hey, right? There's so many ways to say it, but hey, hey there. And what that does is it's a doorway. It becomes a portal into saying, I see you, you're okay. And that incantatory power of how a word is uttered is so important to me. But I just thought, I haven't seen it. I can't do this. Poets don't do this. Poets write beautiful sentences that transform the mundane into a kind of uplift, right? At least that's what I've thought I should be doing. And I think as you do it, you start to shed these things. And I think at the end of the day, I don't know if I believe in style the way, we're asking a craft question, and there's a lot of discussion about style. I must say, in America and the West in general, there's more of an anxiety around style than in other parts of the world as far as writing. And I think that has to do with our capitalist commercial tendencies for branding. What's my style? What's my voice? And I think there's an incredible trap that could happen for a young writer. And my students, who are graduate students, we talk about this a lot. It could be very reductive and limiting to say, this is my style, this is what the 11 people in workshop expect out of me, so I'm going to do this, and I'm going to satisfy this expectation. I'm not going to do anything that's new. I'll betray myself. And I think part of my work, through my experience, is say, I don't know who myself is. Don't limit yourself before you've grown. Allow that to really be open. And so for me, the core of it is surprise. When I see something that comes on the page now, I said, oh, this is new. What is this? Let's find it. I enjoy books more because some books you read it and you feel like the author is kind of like sitting behind a table looking at you, trying to convince you of something, like on a panel. It's like, welcome to my world. Here's why it's important. Here's why you should stay and maybe buy my next book. And it becomes very like this PR. And you can feel the writer performing a kind of hopeful legitimacy, a kind of pandering. And I think I do think in this culture, that's a natural result, right? So much of how we function as students, as professionals, is like, how do I not get fired? How do I get a better grade so I can have a good livelihood? Like so much of this sort of self-improving efficiency, this telos of like satisfying a kind of triumphant, better version of oneself.
How do I keep an audience?
Yeah. And I think when I see that in a book, I start to kind of like inch further away. And I love to read books when it feels like the writer is turning their back to me and they're just digging. And you're just looking over their shoulder like, what is happening, right? You can see the sweat on their back, on the nape of their back, and they're just digging. And it looks like they don't know it's what's happening. And I hope that a reader feels that when I'm working, so can feel my work in searching. One of my favorite poets and theorists, Reginald Shepard, wrote this incredible book of essays called Orpheus in the Bronx. And he says that, we have many identities. We have identities that the culture gives us. In Reginald's case, it was Black, queer, New Yorker, what have you, single, a kid coming from a single mother. And poverty too. And then there's parts of us we don't know. Brother, vegan, depressive, joyous about winter, right? There's so many parts of our identity that are not co-opted by the culture. And how do we lean into that as expressions of ourselves? Because the poem, I think, is a kind of DNA. It's a fingerprint of the selfhood imprinted on paper. And if we only satisfied what the cultural categories demand out of us, then we lose so much of ourselves. And I think that Reginald says that the identity is not fixed and it's not over. It's an active quest. It's a lifelong endeavor. And I think the poem, at its most fundamental metaphor, is an act of digging. That there is no preconceived idea. Like I think my creativity literally dies if I sit down at the desk trying to prove an idea to a reader. And I think it's at its best when I'm trying to enact a way to orchestrate complications of thinking and then make that architecture of thinking shareable, right? So we're building a poem or a novel is, to me, a space-making endeavor. Like, come in here and this is what we're kind of going to think through. And whatever you think is still true. I'm not the kind of author that would ever say a reader gets it wrong. I can't. Because even the way the writing is the only art wherein finishing it is not the final act. Finishing the poem does not complete it. It's complete only when a reader reads it.
That's that Morrisonian moment that I was referring to yesterday, where she
Yes.
talks about, like, the right reader is the one who can create that text with you.
Yes,
Right. Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
And you need, and I would say, any reader's imaginative stage making is true. Even if it's not what I had in mind, it's still true. Like if I hold up this book, it's text. It does not become literature or imaginative writing until someone reads it. I mean, even if I use the word winter, every single one of us has a different image and connotation of winter. Where we are, someone in Australia, someone in Vietnam, someone in Nairobi, someone in Belgium, one word, entirely different imaginative connotations. And so it's a fraught endeavor. Unlike sculpture, photography is a world of surfaces, and literature is the world of an imagination. So the poem and the novel is just a gesture. It's one gesture that is only completed in the stage of the reader's mind. And I think being open to that and that great mystery, because every reader brings their own self to it. And so I think I pull back now. We talked yesterday about the poem wherein the Amazon, list.
Yeah, the list. Yeah.
And I could have never written that, 15 years ago. It took a lot of courage, I think, and trust, like a kind of trust with language. No ideas but in things, William said, to curate something, let it sit on its own. Never would I imagine that I would ever write a poem that has no sentences in it. And yet that one does. And that poem could only work in that way,
So, writing for this audience style, writing for an audience, trying to satisfy the expectations of that audience versus the writer who turns the back. Yeah, like you described it, you see the sweat down the neck as they're struggling. So there's a question that came from a student that kind of wanted to ask that question, but at a different register. I read the question and I wrote failed communication in the margin. So the question comes from Dylan Long, who is in Professor Volp's Complit course. And Dylan asks, what inspired you to choose the format of a letter to your mom, and how do you believe a reader should approach it when engaging with the story, right? Son writes a letter to his mom who can't read it, right? The dead letter sent but never received, right? Like that, like it's there too, that.
Right. Well, the letter is a wonderful technology, and it's a literary device. The Color Purple by Alice Walker is a series of letters, and I think of course there's Baldwin's famous letter to his nephew. There's Ta-Nehisi Coates' letter to his son, and I was really inspired by, and it's not a coincidence that those are all Black authors, right?
Yeah.
That there's something really incredibly powerful and inspiring to me to set up a debut and demand what I would imagine would be a majority white audience, because that's how publishing works. It enters the middle class with disposable. I mean, a hardback book is $30, right? And just so you enter this kind of disposable income, and that's very real, right? And I think that's part of, Toni Morrison acknowledges that too. She says, I know most people who read my book are going to be white, but that doesn't change the fact that I intended this for Black women. Mm-hmm. That's her quote. It was so powerful for me to say that, like to kind of go against the reality and still preserve your agency. Right. And I think for myself, I wanted my first book to be a book where any reader who reads it must eavesdrop on a center, right? They are a voyeur within the center. I did not want to kind of use this book as a kind of anthropological tour bus. Yep. To show what it's like to be Vietnamese American. I needed it to be a conversation between one Vietnamese American to another. Yep. So to close that, and of course, it's a stage, right? The fourth wall collapses and you're reading the book, but it also allowed me to have parenthetical asides. It allows me to kind of, how would this novel articulate itself if it was closed between these two refugees? Certain things don't have to be explained. Certain inside jokes do not have to be translated. And that's very important to me. The Vietnamese in my book, I had to fight with my copy editor for it, right? It's not italicized. I do not want, the pressure of grammatical rules to literally lean my language, right? To italicize the language with a kind of forced, exotified gravity. So there's no language. Spanish is in the book and it's not italicized either. There's no index, there's no glossary. Incomprehensibility and bewilderment is legitimate experience. Yeah. If we walk in the street, we hear other language, we don't know it, that doesn't mean that experience is any less true. But most of white publishing is always demanding this performance of translation to make yourself known. Yeah. How many times have I read Russian novel and I'm like, what the hell is a samovar? Yeah, right, I don't know what a samovar is. It's every room has a samovar. I have no idea what it is. or the Beatles or Seinfeld. Like, I don't know.
Right, the jokes.
Yeah, I don't know the jokes. Don't get it. It was never translated to me. I'm not gonna write, she ate pho, a beef noodle soup flavored with star anise.
Right,
and it's like, no, I can't do that.
Right.
So, and I think to take it a step further is to close that performance, because every novel is a performance. Of course, I know there's going to be a public work, but to close that and to have a reader complete the book. In order to complete the book, you have to eavesdrop on a conversation that's not about you. Mm-hmm. And that's really important to me. Mm-hmm. And I was inspired by Baldwin's Go Tell It on the Mountain. Because Baldwin really, really brilliantly in that book, I think he said, I had to write that book before I wrote anything else. Yeah. And he knew, brilliant mind that he was, that in 1950s America, he's going to get published by a big press. He knows that the majority of the publishing world is going to see that they're going to read this book to get a tour guide of Harlem, so they don't have to go there. They can get a representative to know what it's like, to kind of feel this kind of social anthropology. And Baldwin very, very deftly says, okay, get on the bus. Come on the bus. You're going to think this is a bus about Harlem. Get on, and I'm going to get on with the mic, and I'm going to tell you that this bus is not going anywhere. There's no wheels, and I'm going to talk to you for 300 pages about a single day and the formation of the Black family through the Great Migration, the building of a community. So that book is very subversive. It promises like a plot, but it actually becomes a portrait gallery. Mm-hmm. And so he patiently builds every character. He builds an entire history of every single character. The whole thing is one day. It's 300 pages. It's all about people. Yeah. And I read that book and I said, I have not seen this kind of attention paid to Vietnamese bodies. Yeah. Often we are described as corpses. The coming of age moment for me as an American subject, coming from an imperial war, was, when I was growing up in Hartford, we had 3 channels. Depending on how you move the antenna, you might have 4.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like becomes a quintessential American education and culture, because there were marathons on July 4th, Memorial Day, Veterans Day, and it was all war movies. And as a 6-7-year-old kid, and by the way, I grew up, it's been really healing being here because I'm an East Coast Asian.
You said that downstairs. Yeah.
Like, let me tell you, it's lonely.
Yeah.
It's fucking brutal. It's like you're literally buried in snow.
Yeah.
Like it's like one other, and there's like 3 towns away.
Yeah.
You're like on Grindr trying to find them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's like it's rough out there.
Yeah.
I didn't have boba till I was 28, right?
Hartford.
It's been, yeah,
I know. I totally know.
That's the best is from Hartford. So, but I was, and I think it was really important for me to kind of allow this kind of bewilderment in my work to solidify an estrangement and the isolating loneliness to be felt. And I think the conversation between 2 people is something so intimate, but it's also so lonely. Like to speak, to say everything that you want to your mother in a language that she doesn't have access to, then the pressure falls on language itself. Is it enough? Is it enough to use it as an architecture of imagination if it doesn't achieve the work of communication?
Yeah, that's exactly what I've been thinking about the last 24 hours. It's just like the writing of a letter whose purpose is not relieving trauma. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's not invested in like solving her.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Like
Yes.
that.
Thank you.
Like
Yes.
that. So that's the question. So what? So then, what's the literary architecture? Because this gets to what you sometimes call the moral questions.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like the moral questions you just need to ask. You don't have address those questions directly to your elders,
Right.
but you both feel it.
Yeah, yeah. And this is why fiction to me was not even the best answer, the only answer.
The only answer, yeah.
Because I could not ethically research my novel by asking my elders to unmask the incredible amount of pain that they went through. It was unethical to me. So I had to, I own my experience of them, but I don't have the right to force them to give me their experience for material.
Yeah.
And so the challenge then was to write something that was contextually similar to our lives, but to animate it with research and the imagination. And I think that's why, again, Baldwin was so important to me, because ultimately that book was about love.
Yeah.
And I was talking to my friend Robert Jones Jr., who wrote this beautiful book, The Prophets, about queer love in antebellum between antebellum enslaved men in the South. And he was telling me, it's like, everybody writes about my book and they say it's trauma. And it's interesting because I think violence is objectively there, but trauma is subjective. Mm-hmm. Not all violence equals trauma. And he said, Ocean, I wrote a book about love, and all they see is trauma, right? And I think when we ask like, how do you negotiate trauma? There's a preconceived answer there already. There's a pigeonholing in that it's almost like, why did you write about trauma? And I said, trauma is not a foregone conclusion, right? I wrote a book about survival, but in order to write about survival, I need to write about violence. And but I think a lot of critics, particularly in legacy media, white critics, they latch on to what's recognizable. It's like, it's interesting, right? You read a book about a lot of things, but your takeaway is that it was a book of trauma. But for depending on the communities that you ask, it might be a book about love. You know, Bluest Eye to me is a book about love. It's really incredible because that book addresses and critiques the effects of whiteness without centering white people. Ingenious work, you know. And I said this yesterday, I feel so lucky to be so late to the literary lineages because I get to have a Maxine Kong Kingston. I get to have a Carlos Bolos. I get to have a Toni Morrison. They didn't have themselves. You know, like how wonderful, right? They just had to do it. And how lucky do we get to be alive now? I know it's fraught. It feels sometimes unbearable, but imagine that time keeps unfolding and more people participate in this great mystery of using language, an imperfect, reductive medium. I mean, the dictionary has like 2 or 3 definitions for one word. And here we are trying to expand on it. We're like we're using the thing inside the dictionary to debunk the dictionary. To say that there are more ways to express this. You know, and maybe that's why historically a lot of us end up in asylums. You know, it might not be too far, but when it's good, it's the best feeling in the world. But most of the time, I loathe writing.
You loathe it.
I loathe it.
I talk to my colleagues about this all the time. You just totally, okay, yeah. But like when the question is real in that you're struggling with, like writing is hard. You know,
there's no luck.
Yeah.
You know, Sontag says this. She said, "There's luck in photography. There's no luck in writing.
There's no luck in writing.
You can never accidentally write a good sentence."
That's right. That's right. No.
But on the other side, it's an apprenticeship of care. And I think that is one of the most fruitful endeavors. You know, one could say it's a byproduct of writing is care, but I actually think it's the central. It is the means that to spend your days moving commas around and letters around to get the syntax to be clear enough but full of mystery to provoke and to create an invitation that is also emotionally sound and robust takes incredible amount of care. And I'm not sure of many things, but I would say that I'm really proud. I'm not proud of many things in my work because I have a lot of regrets. But there's one thing that I am definitely proud of in everything I've written is that I have never written a single sentence out of anger.
Sure.
And that's not because I'm not angry.
Yeah.
But I think that, to me, what's the prerequisite of writing is care. And I think care is the afterlife of anger. Care is the other end of anger. It's anger 2.0, right? Because when we thrash and we throw things, we've all been there. The world is so unbearable. We're on the floor. The day's canceled. Eventually, you have to get off the ground. You have to feed your cat, pay the bills, wash the dishes, answer the emails. And then that's the moment, that moment of like, now what, is where I'm most productive.
Right.
And when I feel and maybe this is a Buddhist sort of ethos, where I'm like, I feel the anger. Anger is very powerful. It gets a lot of things done. But when we work out of it as an immediate, we also extinguish ourselves. We lose ourselves in it. And I'm more interested in channeling it differently. It's like the magma coming down, the volcano. I'm waiting for it to cool, and then I can touch it and say, what can I build with this? So care, to me, is an extension of anger. It's just one end of it. It's another version of anger, but it's at least one that's more productive for me.
I see a hand. So you just answered a number of students' questions that I didn't even ask you about nonlinear storytelling, trauma, care. So I think a number of the students will be satisfied. we have a few more minutes, and I know that at the end of the event yesterday, there were lots of hands. So I thought maybe we could spend the next few minutes answering questions in the auditorium.
Okay.
There's a hand. Oh.
Hi. In your conversation yesterday with Professor Hong, there was a lot of discussion about both of your experiences as young poets. So I was kind of wondering if you could give your younger self and say all of the other young writers out there a piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh God. Scare yourself, but don't be scared of yourself. Read everything, but don't judge it. Embody it, right? I think it's so important. I think currently our culture tells us to like or dislike something, right? And so much of what we seek out of consuming is, do I like it or do I don't like it? So we can become kind of consumers often more so than critical thinkers, right? And this is true. I was in Denmark a few years ago for a conference. I was speaking to a Japanese writer, and I was talking about a film. I don't remember what it was, but I said something like, "Oh, how did you like the film?" And I was so American in the sense that when I did that, I kind of just like tossed this thing in her court, and I just thought she was going to tell me, like, did you like it or don't like it?
Like how many Rotten Tomatoes?
Yeah. So I was like, how was it? And then thinking I was going to get just like, a black and white answer. And then she was like, well, in the second act, there was this reciprocal bond theme that came. I was like, whoa. Like in my head, I was like, oh my God, I need to like get a cup of coffee to finish this conversation. I need to like think about this and then respond in kind, right? But I was so like trained and lulled. And I think it's important to shy away from that. It's easy to have that reaction, and we're taught to do that, right? I mean, when we leave like the airport, it's like, did you like airport, right?
Yeah.
Like, like you use the restroom in the airport, it's like, like or no like airport.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's in our muscle, to do that. And I think so much of writing is making, right? Maker, poet. But I think even more of writing is resisting. How do you go against the dogmas and the ideologies? And I think asking yourself what you're reading is like, how does it work, right? Rather than I like or don't like, say, what is it and what does it do? When you ask that question, you're in a different territory and you're in the minority. And that might not be the easiest place to be. You will have very few peers there, and it will be very lonely. But boy, is it so fruitful, right? Do not waste your reading. Even things you ultimately don't like, get something from it. You're halfway through a book, you say, I cannot stand this book. Try to finish it and get something from it, right? Audre Lorde, waste nothing, not even your pain.
Yeah. When I do workshops with students and they're responding to each other's work, I say, take it all in when you're getting the critique. A snake eats the whole mouse. He does not decide which part he likes and he doesn't like. He takes in the whole mouse. So, yeah.
Professor Gayatri Spivak says this: read it once, then read it again before you decide. That closing that hermeneutic circle so you can perform it twice. And then also, we change when we read. Like, works that I've read 10 years ago, I read now, I have a totally different appreciation, a different understanding. So our bodies are like fountains. They're constantly overflowing and changing. And our relationship to the word changes as well. And so I think, try to suspend judgment is always there. It's plentiful. What's rare is asking, how does something work? And when you start to ask that question, the reading becomes much more robust, and you'll start reading like a writer.
Writer.
Hopefully.
Next question. There are two hands in the middle here.
Hello? Okay. Hello. I guess I'm really thinking about how these two things can exist at once. And what I mean by that is like this vision of the author, this intellectual, in this solitary position, like just alone at their desk, but also understanding that literally nothing is possible without community. And I guess my question is, what role do you think conversation has in poetry, and what poetry, or what conversation even means in that regard? Like, what does conversation look like when it's moving forward and backward in time, when it's with other theorists, when it's with authors, or when it's like the actual conversation you're having in your day-to-day with who you're interacting? So yeah, what role is conversation playing in your poetic practice?
Beautiful, beautiful. I have a penchant for hyperbole, and I will say it's everything. And I do mean that. I think, on one hand, when it comes to artists, our culture often wants us to perform humility, right? Humbleness. It's interesting, like, oh, you have a seat at the table, you should be grateful. You have tenure, you should be grateful. You know how rare it is for someone like you to have tenure? That was said to me, you know. And but I know what I'm walking into. You know, I know the landscape, but I think that idea that we demand artists to not ask too much of their vocation, the genre or form they're working, and not ask too much of themselves or ask too much of those around them, right? So this performed respectability, and I don't mean, you know, go beyond. I don't mean like wild ambitions for the CV. I mean, be ambitious for your art and your form and your craft, but also give yourself permission to expand the conversation, the living, as the part of the poem. And many people would say, oh God, oh, you're so romanticizing. You know, what do you mean everything is poetry, right? But if we think poetry is only the sublime, then it seems ridiculous. But if we have a non-Eurocentric definition of poetry, which is not just the sublime, but perhaps information, knowledge sharing, the mundane, the idea of building new lexicons, right? Like the poets in the Black arts movements, right? Opening the genre or the lyrics so it can hold other registers. So in other words, like, yeah, conversation, I treat everything like my work. That doesn't mean like this is all in the office hours. I just mean that my life, poetry is about being porous to the world. If it comes out of the world, language becomes, you know, mimetic, as Aristotle says. If it, at its best, is mimetic of all this. Well, then why should there be one distinction after another? It's not too grand to say conversations with my friends, conversation that I care about, talking with Professor Best here elicits new ideas in me that I can use. It's not too grand, but I personally have been kind of shunned by former teachers of saying, oh God, who do you think you are? Everything is poetry. Get over yourself, right? But it's interesting that we self-police taking our work seriously. But the people who make bombs are never humble. They don't say, oh, let's lower the blast radius this year. Let's lower our profits on Wall Street. Let's not design the app that robs the dopamine levels of our users. Let's not have too many clicks. So it's interesting that there's a double standard. Let's lower our sales. Let's lower our margins, right? None of that. There's bravado. There's utmost, inexhaustible celebration of capital. The death machine is always asked for more. It's celebrated for being more powerful than yesterday. And yet, when it comes to artists, we're asked to not ask for too much. And I think the most powerful thing you can say is that all this is my work. And I take it seriously. I don't take myself seriously, but I take it seriously. I trust that Professor Best has thought about this. You all have thought about this. So much care has come into it. I said this yesterday, like my best research comes as a professor. In my own work, I keep delaying it. I procrastinate, right? But when it comes to, next week, Monday, it's time to teach, I'm right there. 'Cause I have 15 people depending on this shared intention. And they all take it serious. They sacrifice so much. And meeting that effort makes me a better thinker and writer. So it's not even a sacrifice. I don't want to sit here and say, oh, that's the cost of being a writer. No, that's the joy. To be able to pay attention this thoroughly, to not waste a single conversation, for a conversation like ours to hold laughter and deep critical thought and concern, what a life. But we have to teach our way into that. We also have to give each other permission to be that ambitious, to be that serious about it while still laugh. Thank you.
I see some hands in the upper orchestra, I guess you would say. I don't want to lose the back of the auditorium.
Okay, hello. So I attended your talk yesterday, and there was something that you said that really stuck with me that I wanted to ask about. So I'm also really inspired by writers like Baldwin and Morrison, and I know they provide themselves as writers that write to tell the truth. And yesterday you said that truth is historically variable and has been kind of transformed into spectacle. So I was kind of wondering, do you believe that we write to tell the truth? And as truth has become spectacle and it is so variable, how can we write something that is truthful and honest? And I guess in Baldwinian line of thought, is love always going to be the center of truth, or do you think it's something different for you?
Oh, that's great. Truth is every dictatorship, authorial presence, as soon as it comes into power, it starts to control ideas of truth. So I'm just very skeptical of it, right? And I think truth quickly gets aligned or encompasses the mechanisms of myth, right? And I don't mean just the Iliad or the Odyssey. I mean like the forefathers, right? And I think Glissant is very helpful in this thinking, where he talks in his essay, Expanse and Filiation. He says the national myth, the national epic is a naturally conservative device, right? And I don't mean political, like it's meant to conserve the state, right? It preserves it. It legitimizes the state. The obsession of origin. Right, we are our forefathers. Washington did this, right? So we have to honor that by upholding these values, right? And so that becomes an identity. And Glissant says that, the demarcation between an us and a them depends on the myth. The myth transforms. It separates us and a them, and it ultimately becomes a prerequisite to war. Right. So in the Iliad, it's a great example because he said, well, who are the Greeks? Well, the Greeks are the kind of people that would launch 1,000 ships to reclaim one man's honor and to preserve the heteronormative nuclear family, to take Helen back. And so it's like, if we would launch 1,000 ships to do that, imagine what we would do if you fuck with us further, right? So that becomes a rallying moment of pride for that nation, and then it creates an us and a them. The Trojans are, corrupt. They would steal one's man objectified wife, right? So it's really interesting that became such a powerful national myth. But then that's no different than Washington and Jefferson and what have you, right? He chopped down a cherry tree. I spent so much time, his teeth, so much myth. But all of the extraordinary efforts of General Washington was taught to me as an elementary school student. Little did I know that his teeth came from his slaves, right? That wasn't told to me. So then truth becomes selective. It becomes part of ideology very quickly. And so that question lies, well, I'm no better than all that if I write something and say, this too is truth. Because then now there's two truths, and then it starts to become variable, it's diffracted, and then it goes back into the realm of control, right? And I think that is where it lies. Ultimately, I don't think there is a neutral ground with language. I think that we claim it, and then it gets claimed away from us, and then we claim it again. And so there's no leaving it there. If we leave it, someone else will pick it up and turn it into ideology. And so we're up against everything, right? I mean, there's a writer, but then writers get corrupted too. Writers become just as much susceptible to being agents of the state. I mean, Virgil, right? Augustus Caesar, seeing his empire falling apart, taps the greatest poet of their time and say, okay, write a myth that legitimizes the Roman state. It's a great poem, like craft-wise, it's effective, it's interesting, but at the end of the day, it was a solicitation to fortify power. And so that was also presented as truth, So I try to avoid truth, and I'm more interested in inaction. Like, it just is. Here's another variation of the world. But if we have this ultimate truth, it starts to follow the telos of religion, which is also used to control and destroy and wage war, right? My truth is more truer than your truth. And I don't feel very robust when I enter that realm. I think we're human beings, we're fallible. There are a lot of stories to tell. I wonder if how I tell my story will matter against all the ideas of truth. Because truth, I'm less interested in truth, I'm more interested in honesty. Because truth is fixed. Truth is preconceived. Here's the truth. Can't argue with it. Inarguable truth, right? This gets really difficult when it aligns with power. When power says, this is the truth, this is correct, anyone who goes against this will be vanquished. I'm more interested in honesty because honesty is more of a desire. It's a more aspirational desire. It's something we can work towards, right? And you can be emotionally honest, but that sets up a project, whereas truth almost sometimes denies investigation, right? Are you going to question truth? Then you're not one of us. And so, a la glissant, the line is drawn, and now you're the enemy of the state because you've gone against the truth.
Yeah. Oh, okay. One more question.
Yes. Oh, thank you. Sorry. Thank you so much for your work, and thank you for your voice. I'm also a teacher and a writer, and I have a question for you because I know you talked about the the ethics of writing and exposing, and maybe a couple years ago I published a book, and I was working through the process of knowing that it was about love, the book that I wrote, right? But it also, part of that story is my Black American story, which is sometimes traumatic, right? Sometimes very much affected by American history. There is a point at which and I'm sorry, I'm not going to make this long. There was a point at which I had to do some work around the book. I withdrew because what I felt was there was this exposure, and that somehow there was ethically, I was compromised because I felt like, and I go back to what Kiese Layman says about that white America has a bottomless appetite for Black pain, right? And I just want to know how you reconcile that and where you can, because I do think that the art is the thing and the storytelling is vital. But I'm just interested in what you feel and how you, because it would be for a white audience, I know that, and most of my audience was white. And so how do you overcome that possible obstacle?
I think it's very important for me to say you don't overcome that. And I think in the West, we want anyone who speaks on a subject to be its expert, right? Oh, you spoke about war. How do you come to terms with war? How do you come to terms with the pharmaceutical death through profit of your generation in the opioid crisis? How do you come to terms with intergenerational trauma? And so we ask the subject or the artist to answer questions that are orchestrated way beyond they were even born. It's impossible. Rarely do we ask policymakers or politicians, how do you come to terms? CEOs, how do you come to terms? Presidents, right? How do you come to terms with drone striking children in the Middle East? And I think it's important to ask sometimes the audience that question, right? How do you come to terms when I've written so much about love in which you've only recognized pain? That's not me. Uh-oh. Why did you read a book about love and only see pain? There might be a mirror here. So I think it's very important for me, and I've been trying to resist being pigeonholed, right? Because I think a lot of audience, particularly white audience, in my critics as well, say, wow, trauma, trauma, trauma. But it's interesting, right? We don't say that Vonnegut wrote about trauma, even though he wrote about war. We don't say that Hemingway wrote about trauma. We don't say Tim O'Brien wrote about trauma. We say, what incredible testimony, what courage, what innovation. Joseph Conrad, we don't say trauma. We say incredible post-colonial entanglement, right? And so it's important because why am I here? Why do I chose? I'm a very shy person. One of my heroes was Emily Dickinson. When I was a baby poet, I said, let me just write a book and hide. Sometimes I think it's better. But you learn as you go. And when I published my first book, I saw white critics have at it, and I pulled myself. I didn't answer. I didn't do interviews. I just kind of watched, and I learned something. I saw that the life of any writer is very short. If we're lucky, we'll be read beyond our life. But while I'm here, I get to frame it, and I get to ask the questions back. I get to be on record and say, this is how I wanted it to be. There's no right and wrong in how you read it. I stand by that. But for the record, here's what I tried. That felt really important, But there's a price to that, too. In the contemporary space, for me to have a voice, this is really beautiful, right? But often when I go on publicity, when a book is coming out, a publicist would say, okay, there's this magazine who's going to interview you. But in order for that magazine to be funded, they're funded often by fashion companies. So I would have to do a photo shoot first, and I would be in like Valentino and Fendi, all oversized. They're clipping things, and then they take it off me, and then I go home. But why do they do the fashion shoot first before the interview? It's because that's how they get paid. That's how the ad revenue happens. If I wear Valentino in a cover, then Valentino will pay the magazine. So then after I get the photo shoot, then there's an interview. So in order to speak, you need to first make yourself a spectacle. And there's no way to come to terms with that. There's no resolution to that. It's a decision that I decided to make. I don't know how long I can make it, but I found out that that's the price. And that's not even to talk about how the journalists would then warp your words whatever way they want, right? So the power of interpretation is still in the power of the magazine and the journal. So when we get that chance, I would say to you, don't take that. Don't take one interpretation of your work as the final clause. And it's important to ask that question. Why did you read a book about love? And the love is more powerful because it acknowledges hurt. That's what's the amplification. That's craft, right? It's like the bas relief. Something has to come back so something can come forward. So you've written an incredible book that acknowledges Black pain and Black love. You ask that audience why I wrote so much about survival and love, and all you saw was pain. That has more to do with where you're coming from than where I'm coming from.
Ocean, thank you for being so present with us the past 2 days. And I know I speak for everyone in this room and everyone watching. Thank you for your work. Our gratitude is deep. Oh,